Evening, everyone. This is Dr. Sapna Katara from IIMT College of Management, Assistant Professor, Department of BCA. So today's topic for a lecture is inflation. What is inflation? What are various types of inflation? What are the causes of inflation? And what are the various measures to control the inflation? What would be the favorable or unfavorable impacts of inflation on the economy? These are the topics that we are going to cover in today's lecture. So before proceeding with the lecture, we must understand what is inflation. Inflation is commonly understood as a situation of general increase in level of prices of goods and services in an economy. So in a common language, in a layman language, what is inflation? Inflation is general rise in price of goods and services and reduction in the real purchasing power of an layman or a common man or a person in an economy. So there are definition of C. Crowther. According to him, inflation is a state in which the value of money is falling and the prices are rising. That means the depreciation in the value of currency. Constant depreciation in the value of currency leading to the reduction in the real purchasing power of a consumer leads to inflation or rising price of goods and services. In economics, it is measured against a standard level of purchasing power of a consumer. Types of inflation: demand pull inflation, cost push inflation, built-in inflation. These are basically three types of inflations. There are other types of inflation as well. What is demand pull inflation? When in an economy, aggregate demand exceeds aggregate supply. When in an economy, aggregate demand exceeds an aggregate supply means when there is an excess of demand as compared to the supply. When the demand is more than the supply, the prices of goods and services tends to rise. Or we can say when there's a lot of money chasing fewer goods in the economy, that situation is called as demand pull inflation. Second is cost push inflation, when the aggregate demand remains unchanged but the aggregate supply falls due to increase in various factors or due to increase in the price of cost of factors of production. So in economics, there are various factors of production: land, labor, capital, and enterprise. For an example, if the prices of labor rises, the cost of production will rise, and leading to the higher cost of production, the productivity will reduce, leading to the reduction in supply in the market or decrease in supply in the market. But in cost push inflation, the demand side remains stagnant. There's no increase or decrease in demand. We are assuming that the demand is stagnant, demand is unchanged, but the productivity has reduced due to increase in the cost of factors of production. What is built-in inflation? Built-in inflation is a situation or a combination of both demand pull inflation plus cost push inflation. That means here the demand is also increasing, aggregate demand is also increasing, and the prices of cost of factors of production is also increasing, leading to increase in the cost of production and reduction in the productivity. So here the demand is increasing and supply is also decreasing in the market, leading to a very high inflation or rise in price of goods and services. Next is galloping inflation. What is galloping inflation? Galloping inflation is a situation where there's a double or a triple rate of inflation rate increase. When the inflation risk increases at a double or a triple rate or a very fast pace that becomes difficult to reduce it, then the situation is called as galloping inflation. We also call it a jumping inflation. Repressed inflation is a situation of excess demand. When the demand is increasing, and to prevent that increase in demand, we are constantly trying to raise the prices as a repressive measure to suppress the demand. You are raising the prices of goods and services, excess demand. So that situation creates rise in inflation situation has been created with the increase in price of goods and services. Next is hyperinflation. Hyperinflation is the rise in price of goods and services at a very faster rate. So often it happens that the prices increases every hour, every second hour, every third hour. The prices has been increasing for goods and services. It has been increasing of goods and services. It often leads to demonetization also. So such situation is known as hyperinflation. Next is what are causes of inflation? What are the factors that leads to increase in inflation or rise in general price of goods and services? First is increase in public spendings. Government spending is an important part of total spending in any modern economy. It is an important determinant of aggregate economy. So causes of inflation, one of the major causes of inflation is increase in public spending. What is public spending? Public spending is basically a government expenditure that has been continuously increasing over the years. Continuous increase in the expenditure puts large money income in the hands of general public, and that expenditure of the government becomes income for the people, and that income leads to growing public demand for goods and services. Suppose, for an example, if a government is incurring an expenditure in construction or infrastructure sector in building hospitals, schools, colleges, then they are creating employment opportunities in the economy. With the increase in employment, the income of the common people increases, the income for the people increases, and when the income level rises, the demand in the economy for goods and services consequently rises. So with the increase in demand, if you're not being able to match up with the equivalent supply, the situation of rise in price of goods and services arises. So that causes inflation. That is called as increase in public spending or increase in government expenditure. Second cause for the inflation or rise in price of goods is deficit financing of government spending. What is deficit financing? Deficit financing basically means when the government expenditure is beyond or government expenditure is beyond its revenue. So deficit financing basically refers to printing of currency through RBI to meet the shortage of money in the government expenditure. The rising expenditure of the government is basically responsible for deficit financing. It is one of the methods of financing the economic development. It is one of the methods of financing the expenditure of the government that to increase the currency, and with the increase in currency or printing of a new currency, the money supply of the currency increases, which raises the aggregate goods, which raises the aggregate demand for goods and services. When the supply of money increases in an economy, the demand for goods and services increases, which leads to increase in the price of goods and services. Another reason for increase in price of goods and services or inflation is increased velocity of circulation. Increased velocity of circulation here means increase of money supply in the market at a very faster rate. That means people are spending money at a very faster rate. That means people are creating demand. The aggregate demand is increasing at a very faster rate as compared to the increase in the supply of goods and services, leading to the rise in price of goods and services. Next reason for increase in supply prices, increase in price of goods and services, or that increase in inflation rate is population growth. With an increase in population, the pressures of excess demand is being created in the economy. With the increased population, our higher growth rate of population is higher rate of population increases heavy pressure on the aggregate demand, really leading to the increase in price level of the country. Another reason is hoarding, or we can say growth of black money. The black money refers to that money which has been uh, or that has been increased by hoarding of essential commodities. Black money has been created through hoarding of essential commodities. At the time of social shortages, usually a tendency on the part of the trader or merchant to hoard the essential commodities to make huge profit. Such hoarding creates scarcity in the market. So such scarcity leads to a greater rise in price of goods and services. If you stockpile up the goods and services at the time of the demand, in the market, in the go down, if you're stockpiling your goods in the go down at the time of when the demand is very high in the market, you're creating a shortage of goods and services in the market. When you create shortage of goods and services, you're creating a scarcity, and that scarcity leads to rise in the prices of goods and services. Genuine shortage, when the factors of production are in short supply, that also leads to when the factors of production like labor, raw material, capital are short in supply, that leads to reduction in the production, or that leads to decrease in production. So when the productivity reduces, supply will be lesser in the market as compared to the demand, leading to the rise in price of goods and services. Exports, the total output of the commodity is not sufficient to meet both domestic. The total output of the commodity in the market is not sufficient to meet the domestic need of, or to meet the domestic demand, or to meet the domestic need, and we are exporting those goods and services outside, which leads to the shortage of those goods and services in the domestic market, leading to the rise in price of goods and services. Next is the trade union. By demanding the increase in wage rate, that is trade unions demand for higher wages is one of the ways to one of the ways to increase the rate of goods and services. When trade unions demand higher wages, they are actually increasing the cost of production, because increase in wages leads to higher cost of production, and which will hamper the productivity, because producer has to increase the prices of goods and services to maintain the cost of production, to maintain his profit. This leads to inflation. Measures to control inflation. How we can control inflation? There are basically two important measures to control inflation. One is monetary policy, another one is a fiscal policy. Monetary policy refers to central bank's approach of managing the money supply and interest rate through the use of monetary policy instruments under its control. What is monetary policy basically? Monetary policy is the policy of central bank to control money supply and credit creation in the economy. Basically, money supply is a policy where government or central bank or RBI is trying to control the supply of money in the economy and credit creation through banks. So the way amongst various measures to control the inflation, the two important measures under monetary policy are quantitative measures or quantitative instruments or quantitative tools, and other one is qualitative instruments or qualitative tools. Another method to measure or to control inflation is fiscal policy. Fiscal policy of the government is the policy to reduce the expenditure or to control the flow of money through increased taxes and controlling expenditures. So what are the qualitative measures or quantitative tools of monetary policy are? First is statutory liquidity ratio. What is statutory liquidity ratio? Statutory liquidity ratio is basically Statutory liquidity ratio is actually a minimum percentage of net demand and time liabilities which commercial banks are required to maintain themselves. Reduce the rate of inflation in the economy, RBI usually raise the SLR rate. With the rise in SLR rate, the banks are required to keep a larger amount in safe and liquid assets with them, which restricts their credit creation capability. So banks are not able to lend a higher money into the market when the SLR rates are higher. That means banks have to keep a larger amount of money as a liquid assets with themselves, and they have lesser money to lend as a credit to the in the market. This reduces the money supply in the economy, and with the reduction in the money supply in the economy, the aggregate demand reduces, leading to lower prices of goods and services and control of inflation. Another quantitative measure taken by the RBI as a monetary policy tool is cash reserve ratio. Cash reserve ratio is a minimum percentage of net demands and time liabilities to be kept by the commercial bank with the central bank or the RBI. So when the CRR is raised, banks are required to keep a more or larger amount of cash with the RBI. That is the amount of cash that uh, every commercial bank has to keep with the RBI, required to keep with the RBI. So that when the inflation is very high and to control the inflation, RBI raises the CRR rate. In that case, banks have to keep a larger amount of cash with the RBI. As a result, banks' ability to lend to the market declines. So lending rate rises, rate at which the credit is being created or loans are being given. Rates rises, loan giving rates are banks are being rises. So market liquidity will shrink. As a result, inflation is controlled and aggregate demand, money supply is controlled. And with the control in money supply, the aggregate demand reduces. Repo rate. The repo rate is the rate at which central bank of the country lend money to the commercial banks to meet its short-term requirements. So during periods of high inflation, RBI raises the repo rate to reduce the flow of money in the economy. With the rise in repo rate, banks' borrowing capacity has been reduced by the RBI. As a result, market liquidity decreases. When the bank want to reduce the ability to create credit of commercial banks, it raises the repo rate, and with the rise in repo rates, commercial banks' capacity to borrow from RBI reduces. Next is reverse repo rate. Reverse repo rate is a rate at which RBI sells or purchases the government securities. So to combat high levels of inflation, RBI raises the reverse repo rate. So it encourages the bank to park funds with the RBI. That means to park funds with the RBIs. That means banks and commercial banks and individual investors start buying government securities from the RBIs, which leads to the reduction or shrinking of money supply from the market. As the liquidity is reduced, the borrowing interest rate rises. So this leads to control of inflation in the economy. Bank rate. Bank rate is the rate at which the central bank of the country or RBI lends money to commercial banks for long-term purposes. So during the periods of high inflation, the bank RBI increases the bank rate to reduce the flow of money in the economy. With the rise in banks borrow lesser money from the RBA. As a result, the market liquidity decreases and lending rates rises, making borrowing more expensive for businesses and industries, so slowing investment and money supply in the market. Next is open market operations. To combat higher level of inflation, RBI drains the market of excess liquidity by selling government securities. Bank lend money to the RBI by borrowing government securities. This reduces economics excess liquidity. Lending rate rises, making borrowing more expensive and stifling private investments. So some of the qualitative tools that has been used by RBI to control inflation are moral suasion. Moral suasion is basically a combination of persuasion and pressure that central bank applies on other banks to get them in a manner or to get them in line with its policy to reduce the credit in the economy or to control the supply of money in the economy. Another qualitative tool that has been used by the RBI is credit control. RBI directs banks to increase lending in one sector while decreasing lending in another sector. That simply means a rationing of a credit to a particular sector. So under this, for an example, if government wants to increase, if the food inflation is constantly rising, the RBI can direct banks to increase loans in the agriculture sector in order to bring prices down. With the increase in loan in the agriculture sector, the productivity in the agriculture sector will increase. With the increase in productivity, the supply of food commodities in the market will increase, and when the supply of food commodities in the market will increase as compared to its demand, the prices will automatically come down. So this is how RBI controls the inflation under various tools of monetary policy, quantitative and qualitative tools. So apart from monetary policy to control the inflation, other measures that have been taken by the government to control the inflation is fiscal measures. So fiscal policy or fiscal measures refers to the policy of central government that controls the situation or that controls the expenditure of the government to reduce the money supply in the economy. It is also known as revenue and expenditure policy of the government. Government can control inflation through its fiscal policy. The main constituents of this policy is public expenditure and taxation. So decrease in government spendings, a huge amount on infrastructure. Basically, government need to reduce expenditure, public sector expenditure. So public sector expenditure on infrastructure and administrative activities. To control the situation of inflation, the government should reduce its expenditure to maintain to the maximum possible extent. So more emphasis should be placed by the government to reduce expenditure on unproductive works, which are not leading to any kind of growth in the economy. So increase in government spending will reduce the level of increase in government spending will lead to the increase in inflation. So to control that inflation, the government need to decrease its spending. That will lead to decrease in the level of aggregate demand and helps to correct the situation of inflation, because increase in public expenditure basically leads to increase in employment. With the increase in employment, the income levels of all in the economy also increases, and with the increase in the income levels, the demand for the commodities in the market will rise. So to combat that, government need to reduce the expenditure on administrative and infrastructure activities. Another reason that is responsible, another way of reducing or controlling the inflation is taxation. Through taxation also, or we can also call it a revenue policy of the government. Government imposes different kinds of direct or indirect taxes on the public. So during inflation, government increases the rates of taxes and even impose some new taxes. It leads to decrease in the level of aggregate expenditure in the economy and helps to control the inflation. That means with the increase in personal taxes, for example, if the government increases the personal taxes, government is going to increase the personal tax. That means it is reducing your purchasing power, or it is reducing the money that you have in your hand to spend in the market. So as per your budget, your money in the money that you have in your hand to spend in the market reduces when the rates of taxes and personal or the rate of personal taxes increases. So this leads to reduction in the prices of goods and services, leading to control the inflation. The last topic is what is impact of inflation. There are certain favorable and unfavorable impacts of inflation. So what are the favorable impacts of inflation? Higher profit of the producers are generally favorably affected by inflation because they can sell their products and their goods and services at a very higher prices, leading to higher profits. Another favorable impact of inflation is higher investment. The entrepreneurs and investors get added incentives to invest in productive activities during inflation since they can earn higher prices. So what are unfavorable impacts of inflation? So one of the unfavorable impacts of inflation is fall in the real income of fixed income groups and increase in speculative investments. Fall in the real income of fixed income groups means a person whose fixed salary is 20,000 for an example, a person who's earning 20,000 rupees per month. So if the rates of goods and services increase, his real purchasing power will reduce, because what he is capable of buying at in 10,000 rupees earlier, he is not capable of buying the same amount of quantities in the same 10,000 rupees. The prices of goods and services rises. What you can buy in at 10 rupees, with the increase in price of that commodity to 2 rupees, now you cannot buy the same quantity that you were earlier buying in 10 rupees or in 20 rupees. Earlier you can buy two commodities in the 20 rupees when the price of one commodity is 10 rupees. But with the increase in price, you have to spend instead of 24 rupees to buy the same two commodities. In this way, it reduces the real purchasing power of a consumer or real purchasing power of the people. Next is increase in speculative investment. Yes, price level rises at a faster rate. It leads to speculative investments like purchasing of shares, land, gems, etc., just for speculative purpose. It may lead to earning a quick profit, but these type of investments do not help in creation of any kind of productive capital, or there's no capital creation or in the economy, and that is a kind of unproductive investment which is not leading to any productivity and thus not leading to any kind of increase in this on the supply side, leading to high rise in prices. So this was a topic on inflation, a lecture on inflation. I hope you all understood it very well. Thank you and have a good day.